everyone. So my name's Mary Mundy and I'm a partner at the law firm Capsticks, and I specialise in procurement, and I'm joined by my colleague Paul McFarlane, who's a partner who specialises in employment, and by Ellie Lamb, who is the procurement category manager at NHS Supply Chain for National Ambulance Uniforms. I'm going to put these headphones on because it's really hard to not hear the rest of the noise. Okay, so the purpose of today's session is to draw out how equality, diversity and inclusivity is not just one concept to be the focus of HR teams, but that these are three separate concepts that need to be embedded in all areas of your organisations. We'll focus on how these concepts can be embedded into a public procurement process. Over the last few years, organisations have been recognising that they need to do more to make positive change and to seek to challenge and tackle inequality. Now, in the context of procurement for healthcare services, for example, it's obvious that there is a real need to tackle health inequalities, and your organisations will be doing that. But we're going to look at different types of procurements, and particularly with a focus on products. I can't believe that only 2 years ago, the first retailer in the UK launched plasters for different skin tones. But I recognise that my disbelief in that also goes hand in hand with my privilege. I was also reading that only last month, female crash test dummies were being used in cars. And also, I was interested to see the recent publication around Virgin permitting their employees, irrespective of gender, to choose their uniforms. And I think these are great examples of how the status quo has been maintained for years, but people are finally starting to question whether or not their products are meeting the needs of everyone and not just some people in society. So, as I say, we're going to look at procurement, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Paul to talk about the kind of equality, public sector duty and how that impacts.
Thanks, Mary. So before we get into the procurement side of things, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what the public sector equality duty is about. As you can see on the slide, there's a clear emphasis that in relation to EDI issues is a priority for organisations both in the public and private sector, as important to integrate considerations of equality and good relations into your day-to-day business of public authorities. And those who commission public works need to understand their legal obligations under the public sector equality duty. So equality considerations need to be a thread running through any decisions-making processes that you take. And this applies both to public providers and those who provide, those from the private sector who provide public functions. But what is the public sector equality duty? You need to have due regard to these three things. It eliminates unlawful discrimination, harassment and victimisation, advance equality of opportunity between peoples who share a protected characteristic and those who do not, and foster good relations between people who share protected characteristics and those who don't. These are sometimes referred to as the three aims or the three arms of the general equality duty of the Act. And the Act goes on to explain that having due regard to advancing equality duty involves removing or minimising disadvantages suffered by people who due to their protected characteristics are disadvantaged, taking steps to meet the needs of people from protected groups where these are different from those of different groups, and encouraging people from protected groups to participate in public life or in other activities where their participation is disproportionately low. The Act states that meeting these needs involves taking steps to take account of their particular disadvantages. And it also describes fostering good relations as tackling prejudice and promoting understanding between people from different groups. It states that compliance with a duty may involve treating people more favourably than others. But the equality duty covers all of the 9 protected characteristics, so age, disability, gender, reassignment, pregnancy, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. And public authorities need to have due regard to the need to eliminate unlawful discrimination against someone because of their marriage or civil partnership. This means that the first aim of the duty applies to this characteristic as well as the other characteristics. I think just by way of closing, I think it's just important to get the background to this. This duty came into force originally just specifically in relation to race on the back of the McPherson reports back in 1999. And it really is important that public authorities pay attention to this duty going forward. I'm going to now pass you back to Mary, who's going to speak specifically about procurement.
Yeah, great, thank you. So as I said earlier, the public sector equality duty is not just something that HR teams need to focus on. And I've been thinking about it a lot in the context of advice I've been giving to clients who are running procurement processes, including Ellie and the work that NHS supply chain has been doing. And we were kind of focusing on how the duty and equality, diversity and inclusivity can be built into procurement processes. Now, we're at a kind of funny stage in relation to procurement legislation that NHS organisations are currently having to comply with, because we do know that we expect new legislation in a couple of years' time, and when the government published their green paper on transforming public procurement a couple of years ago now, they were focusing on the fact that they really wanted to encourage public sector organisations to look at social value when they're evaluating the tenders that come back. And so the suppliers are now under obligations to make sure that they include social value within their tenders. Now, social value is kind of an umbrella term that covers lots of different areas, and equality, diversity and inclusivity often falls under the social value umbrella. And there has been lots of really useful resources published by the government recently in relation to how these questions can be built into procurement processes and how suppliers can be expected to deliver on these issues going forward. We've also got the National Procurement Policy statement, which came out last year, which focuses on the need to create new business, tackle climate change, and also increase supplier diversity, innovation and resilience. And so there are lots of kind of very obvious questions around suppliers making sure that they manage their supply chains appropriately and eradicate modern slavery, for example. There are also lots of questions that focus on staff well-being, and in the context of us, for example, when we're bidding for services, we are now often asked to explain how we are addressing issues about diversity across our workforce, because it's recognised that law firms, for example, have an issue in terms of the diversity across people at various levels of the organisation. What's been really interesting though is the work that NHS supply chain have done in relation to the National Ambulance Uniforms procurement, which I'm going to talk about shortly. Because I think the most obvious way to address these issues is for people to look at the specifications for the contracts that are going to be procured and really think about how the quality, diversity, inclusivity can be built into those specifications in terms of obligations, the examples I gave earlier about those various products, how it's really, really good to kind of question the status quo and think about whether the contracts are delivering and meeting the needs of those that will benefit from them. So I'm now going to play a short video that gives some background to the National Ambulance Uniforms contract that Ellie was recently involved in procuring, and then we're going to interview Ellie and get some more details about it. Oh, I've gone too far, sorry. I did say I wasn't very good with technology. There we go.
The main success of this project has been the collaboration.
This is truly a National Ambulance uniform that's been designed by us, for us.
We made sure that every garment that was going to be supplied to our staff will ensure that they are proud to be in that uniform.
This project is a National Ambulance Uniforms project to develop a brand new framework for the National Ambulance Service with regards to uniform and general workwear items. During the pre-tender engagement, we met frequently with the National Ambulance Uniforms user group. We had representation across the UK from various trusts consisting of paramedics, operational staff, equality diversity leads and procurement staff as well. We had a samples approval day, and it helped the people attending to actually touch and feel those samples.
We've been working with a number of suppliers, so Cooning providing the main uniform garments. We've then got Clad Safety, we've got Healthy Bean, we've got Arco and Dimensions, who are all providing other garments within Lot 2. So we had to ensure the uniform was fit for purpose for all those wearers, and bear in mind they're working in very different environments. We've had that two-way engagement with each of the ambulance trusts. I think that's key, so it's not one size fits all. It is around getting that feedback from each of the ambulance services.
The new enhanced visionary trouser was really important to us, and it was important that we get it right. The biggest issue that we had with the previous iteration was the quality of the trouser. It wasn't designed for how ambulance staff operate on a day-to-day basis, and we're looking to get it right this time around, to win their confidence, to show them that we have listened to the feedback that we asked them to share, to make those subtle changes, to make a garment that's comfortable for them to wear for 12, sometimes 16 hours a day.
We looked at that feedback with the supplier Canine. We looked at sort of several options that were available to improve the trouser. So we looked at the fabric, so that it's got some more stretch. We looked at the overall fit and designs. Different features are in more appropriate places or are more robust. We've changed pocket sizes and just overall made the trouser a more fit for purpose garment.
The next step is to get wearers out trialling it. We will have 100 wearers out in the workplace to ensure it is fit for purpose. And if we need to make any adjustments, then we can look to do that within the contract.
The national uniform offer is brand new in terms of the turban, hijab and the kippah in the National Ambulance Green Pantone. The new equality, diversity and inclusion garments means that people do not need to change their identity. They can come to work and be religiously observant. These garments will acknowledge the fact that we are an inclusive employer. It's really important because ambulance services need to be representative of the communities that they serve.
I think it is absolutely fantastic that the ambulance service have procured garments of different faith communities. The service overall have actually invested in trying to make that as standard. What it does show is that the organisation is committed to attract different members of the community to come and work for them.
The whole idea of the online ordering system is that we will be pushing it back out to the individuals to actually order their own uniform. They would also see real-time visibility of where their uniform is in the supply chain. Another benefit is they can reallocate it to a station that's closer to them where they live, not necessarily where they actually work. We found that the online ordering system is also very user-friendly because it's portal-based. They are able to order their uniform on any platform, on a laptop, on a mobile phone, on a tablet.
End users can order all of their core uniform garments on the same ordering portal. The other suppliers on Lot 2, customers can order them through traditional purchase order.
The overall benefit for the staff that are going to be wearing this uniform is it should be fit for purpose, comfortable, easy to wash, dry and available. Being able to do a quick order online would meet the needs of the staff.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of the end users, procurement staff for taking part in this project and working together collaboratively across the NHS.
Our uniform is something that we wear with pride. The public need to see someone that approaches them that looks professional, that looks the part, looks like someone they can trust so that we can care for them effectively. This was our opportunity to truly be part of a team that developed a uniform that is fit for purpose.
So Ali, can you tell us how the opportunity to collaborate with the NHS National Ambulance Service came about?
So before I start, I'd like to say it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. It's the first event that I've actually been to since the pandemic. So I'd like to dedicate my part of this today to all the NHS staff that worked during the pandemic and to anybody that lost loved ones during that time. Thank you.
So when you were, so talk to us about how you got to collaborate with the NHS National Ambulance.
Yeah, so it was a great opportunity. We, as NHS Supply Chain Hotel Services, we had the novated framework from the NHS Commercial Alliance, so it was a great opportunity to build on the work that was already in place through that previous contract. Now, in terms of the ambulance service itself, it was a really good time. It was all about timings. For them to actually understand where improvements could be made. There was a question that was asked in 2019 by the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service, and it was around the provision for maternity wear on that previous contract. Now, it became apparent that there was going to be a bit more of a complex piece of work that was going to be undertaken, because it was apparent that there wasn't actually a coverage on that particular contract. So the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service actually asking that question prompted a huge survey within the ambulance service, and Mark Ainsworth, who you've seen on the video there, he was really a key person to drive that through, along with some of the equality diversity leads in the ambulance service.
So Ellie, what were the main concerns raised by staff in the survey?
So in terms of the survey, it was apparent that in particular headdressers, there were some inconsistencies across trusts where people who actually wanted to wear headdressers had to pay for them themselves and then were reimbursed. So that was apparent. Also, it was around the fit of the previous uniform that actually a lot of the staff were saying it's not one size fits all. So there was room for improvement, in particular with the trouser. So, as I say, it was a great opportunity to bring all that together and make some changes. There was a real appetite for change.
What were the main drivers in relation to ED&I?
So it was all about the stakeholders. There was around 13 ambulance trusts in the UK that were engaged with this. And their passion, their commitment, their drive, it became really apparent that we had to do something, in particular based on the survey feedback as well. 2,500 members of staff actually completed the survey. So we wanted to make sure that we made a uniform by the NHS for the NHS.
What were the main challenges during the incorporation of the EDI recommendations?
So the main challenges were the fact that there was that many stakeholders, equality by diversity leads, procurement staff, operational staff, paramedics, and we'd all got different views, so we brought all of that together. And bearing in mind we were actually delivering this during the pandemic, we built really strong, good relationships through our laptops in our kitchens. You know, we had frequent meetings pre-tender in particular. And in terms of the brand new trouser, we knew at the time that we wanted to have an extra mechanical stretch with the material, although we didn't necessarily know what that trouser should look like at that time. So we were able to build all of that into the tender to allow us to develop that post-award with the awarded supplier on the core uniform.
And so how was EDI drawn out through the procurement process?
So it was all through the specifications. All of the people that you see on the video there and others, all the trust representatives, they came forward and they brought all that together with myself during our meetings, and we just drove that forward.
And tell us a bit more about the enhanced visionary trouser workstream.
So post-award, I've actually led on 2 work streams. One was to develop the online ordering system, which you've seen in the video there, and the other was to develop a brand new trouser with the ambulance service. Now, we are due to launch in summer 2023, but we went through various stages as a process during the launch period. So one of the first ones was to actually work on a design board with the core uniform supplier, Cuneen, and 2 representatives from Ambulance Trusts. Now, we presented that at the January 2022 samples viewing day. Bearing in mind we were working during COVID restrictions, so there was only one person allowed per trust to attend that event, and it was all socially distanced. But on the day, we did a vote through Slido, and we actually identified any additional features which could improve the functionality. Now, since then, we've actually recently approved the 3rd prototype, which is the final prototype of that trouser, and the supplier Cuneen is now manufacturing that. We've got 100 wearers, and that's a split across all of the NHS Ambulance Trust. So, as you can imagine, the ambulance service are very enthusiastic, they're very passionate about their uniform and their day-to-day work. So we didn't struggle getting volunteers to trial the trouser. We also have an online evaluation form which they will complete during the trial process, and they'll be able to access that through their mobile phones and laptops for easy completion.
And what impact was the availability of the cultural garments delivered to the end user?
It's pretty life-changing, to be honest. During the engagement, talking to Karen, the lady on the video, she was really happy to share various experiences with me. She's quite new to the ambulance service. She joined in January this year. And part of Karen's role is to actually engage with interfaith communities. Now, it was apparent there was a number of questions being asked by the end users at those meetings, and it was around about the way that they understood there wasn't actually anything that they could wear that was part of a national agreed setup. So since then, Karen has obviously fed back that we now have a national uniform. It's Pantone ambulance green, and the hijab, kippah and turban, they're all involved with that too. So it's pretty life-changing. It just takes one person to make a change, and for me it was about putting myself in somebody else's shoes, and that was one thing that they were really happy to share with me during this whole experience, to help me learn and understand and listen about why they needed to include certain items in their uniform.
So Ellie, if you had any advice for anyone who was going to be incorporating EDI into their procurement process, what would it be?
Listen to your stakeholders, engage with everybody. We had a wide range of stakeholders: equality, diversity leads, procurement staff, paramedics, operational staff, and it's about embracing all of that difference and thinking about the inclusion aspects. In another 12 months we will be looking at the uniform again and doing another survey to basically check and review all of the improvements that we've made and enhancements, and how well they've been received across the NHS and the people wearing them. So just take time and build it all into your project plans and work together. I hope that you can see there that we've worked collaboratively across the NHS, we've shared our expertise, and I'm sure you can all do the same with your stakeholders too.
Thanks, Ellie. Thank you. So hopefully that just gave some examples of how there really can be some thinking outside of the box in terms of EDI, and it can be built into procurement processes. As I keep saying, it's not just something for HR teams to focus on in the context of policies. And I think we're in a real period of change. We know that suppliers across lots of different markets are really thinking about how they can incorporate changes into their products, how they can build social value offerings into their delivery, and they will be expecting to respond to questions from NHS procurement processes and how they can deliver and support on these to make the positive change that obviously NHS supply chain have done as well in relation to the national ambulance uniforms. So I'm conscious that we no questions have come through on the iPad, but if anyone does have any questions, someone's going to come up to you with a microphone. Thank you.
Hi. I'm really interested how we improve sort of procurement and working with local suppliers. So I can see what you're talking about, but that's a massive national procurement. I want to be buying from local suppliers that employ local people, which are some of the things that were on the slides.
Yeah.
You haven't really touched on that, I suppose, and my worry is, so voluntary sector is an obvious supplier for us. We deliver mental health LD services. But some of the things you're describing actually create barriers for those smaller organisations, the need to demonstrate this and this because they're small, but that's why we want them, because they're embedded in the community. So I wondered if you've got any advice, any thoughts on that side of it, because that for us is really where the EDI and the addressing the inequalities comes from.
Yeah, I agree with you actually. I think it is very difficult when you have a national policy that says you need to build all these things into your procurements, and organisations have to respond to them, because those organisations usually have to have swanky bid teams able to, you know, address those questions and to make, you know, distinguish themselves. So I agree with you, it can be really difficult. I think when it comes to encouraging local suppliers, I think market engagement before you go out and start a procurement process is absolutely key, so that you have those conversations with the local suppliers, see what they can do, work with them, explain to them the types of questions that they might be asked to, or the types of things that they might be asked to contribute, and kind of work with them. You can think about how you structure your procurement, so there is technically an obligation to think about how you break your procurement up into lots, so which is meant to favour SMEs and smaller organisations and local organisations. So it kind of comes down to a mixture of category strategy, making sure that that works for those local suppliers, having those conversations with them and listening to them, like Ellie said, in terms of having conversations with stakeholders, obviously the market has stakeholders as well, and then working out how to focus your procurement so that they're able to participate. And it might be that they can't deliver the whole contract, but they could be subcontractors, they could collaborate. You know, there's a massive focus on collaboration within the NHS at the moment. So it's just encouraging suppliers to have those conversations. You know, if you're talking about a service, for example, thinking how it could be structured so that more people can you know, provide and deliver as part of that contract. Are there any other questions? Oh yeah, sorry, there's one on here. So how far down the supply chain do our responsibilities for EDI go? Yeah, so when bidders are asked to respond to a tender process, they do have to set out who their subcontractors would be, for example, and they need to describe what they will be doing, and it might be that those subcontractors also need to give certain information and you know, kind of from a tender process make sure that they pass certain information. When it comes to things like making sure that there isn't any modern slavery across the supply chain, then yeah, that does go all the way down. So it would be important for the lead contractor to make sure that those subcontractors are complying with their obligations as well, and they will have to pass down all of those statutory obligations through their supply chain.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that point, I think the point is that those duties are not delegable. So whilst they'll have obligations under your contract, ultimately you'll have an obligation. So you may get indemnities in your contract that you make sure that they'll pay you if they don't fulfil their side of the bargain, but ultimately it will still be your responsibility for public function.
Thanks very much for your presentation, and I think it's a great piece of work, so thanks for that for the team. I think really for me the most important thing is that there should be some sort of real learning taken from this exercise. Not so much the who was involved, but the how they were involved and at what stages they were involved in. So getting staff on side, getting the EDI leads on side from the very beginning of the procurement process would have been really, really important. And I'm glad to hear that you're going to be reviewing it again in a year, because it isn't something that you kind of launch into now. When the procurement's done, then you just drop all the connections and you never go back to engaging with those people again. They need to be continually engaged. They need to continue being fed back to. And I think that's the same for any process around engagement. I think for me, the issue is that when the pressure is on and when people need to really act quickly, because we all end up in those situations, end of the year spending comes in and everyone's given a pot of money to get rid of in a couple of weeks. So how do we make sure that process is still being followed even under those times of pressure? And what advice would you give to people who didn't think that was the way to go around their procurement?
That's interesting. It's a really good question. I mean, I can only answer that as a national lead for this project, to be honest. I can't imagine what it must be like for people who are working at locality level. But for me, it's all about listening and understanding these stakeholders, and the National Ambulance Uniforms User Group were particularly instrumental with this project, and we were able to engage with them very, very early on. They've been involved with every part of this procurement process. We even had some of the group as part of the evaluation team for the non-financial evaluation questions. So for me, I can only answer it nationally, I'm afraid, that it's about making that time, but I totally appreciate if you've got budget that you need to use by the end of the year, that's not really going to help you, is it? So I'll hand you over to Mary and Paul just to give a bit more insight from their view. Thank you.
So, I mean, I know what that's like because, obviously have to advise clients who are regularly in that situation, and I know I'm talking about in an ideal world, and we certainly don't live in one, and not at the moment. I think for things like what we've brought to discussion today, they really need to be fed back to organisations so that procurement teams, people across EDI leads, people in sustainability, teams across an organisation are working together to think about, okay, what can we do in this area that can have this ripple effect across the organisation, and from a procurement perspective in contracts, where will that feed in, so that you can kind of think of potential questions that could be asked. I mean, it isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, and from a kind of very technical procurement perspective, the legislation says that questions, evaluation criteria have to be linked to the subject matter of the contract. So you shouldn't have just a list of bog standard questions that you just fire out, because they might not be relevant. And going back to your point, it won't necessarily work for those smaller local organisations who are participating. But there will be some questions that can be tweaked specifically, that are there and ready, so that if you are having to do a quick process, or you are wanting to build things into specifications, or you're wanting to tweak your policies that then suppliers have to comply with in delivering to you, it can start to happen. But I think it'll be, these issues are going to be slowly being kind of implemented across organisations, I think. But that's what I would say for that, because you're right, you're not going to be able to do anything like what Ellie could do through that process if you're having to do really quick fixed contracts or quick processes. And sorry, your second part, what was the second part of your question?
It's just, what advice would you give to people? I mean, what's the benefit of doing it the way that you've done it, that if people don't do it that way, the things that they could fall short of?
I honestly think, if you don't do it the way that I did it, with those willing people, though, that's the other thing to mention. I appreciate that sometimes we all overcome barriers, but there was a real appetite. So my situation is quite different in terms of the fact we were all willing to be open, transparent and collaborative. But I'd suggest if it's not done the way that was done, it's the questions I would ask is how can you get your end user to actually use your frameworks or your contracts if they're not involved with that process? As I said earlier, it was for them, by them, with me leading, facilitating that, and it's different setup, isn't it, nationally? I guess
what you said about putting yourself in someone's shoes, how can you put yourself in that person's shoes if you haven't asked them what are the issues that you're facing, or what are the different areas that we need to address? So I think it's a case of, again, getting people to speak to people across the organisation, whether it's staff members, whether it's members of the public, whether it's patients, and what specific barriers are they seeing that need to be addressed from an ED&I perspective. So yeah, I suppose that's the advice, it's to work out who the stakeholders are.
And for me, being an employment lawyer, I think not doing it that way can result in disengagement of staff, and not necessarily mean you'll get a claim, but you may lose staff who you wouldn't necessarily have lost. So I think it's bringing all these strands together and trying to make this process business as usual. That might take time, but trying your best to do that, because that way you will retain more staff, particularly staff you want.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a quick question. Fantastic effort at including so many people. I'm just wondering, will you use this to recruit for the ambulance service specifically in your marketing campaigns and some of your actionable recruitment strategies? Because I mean, that speaks for itself if you went out to communities looking to, I'm just thinking about workforce resilience and ensuring that we have the next generation of people wanting, as you said, that appetite to want to come and work for the NHS. Will this be something that you will then embed in your procurement processes for people to come and join?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I work for NHS Supply Chain Hotel Services, so we've facilitated this process, but what the Ambulance Trust will do is they will use the video for the onboarding of their staff, and it's as narrow as they'll know what items to order, but also it's more strategic in that it makes them feel valued, it brings that inclusion and representation together. So absolutely, we're sending a few tweets out today, and all of the trusts that were involved in the video are actually being hashtagged on that. NHS Supply Chain is working a bit more this week on more of the launch process, getting the video on the website. This is the first public showing of the video today, and then next week it will be disseminated across the UK for all the other staff to use. But yeah, it's a really good question.
And it'll be really interesting to see actually the numbers and whether people from different faith communities, for example, are applying more now that they know that they'll be able to have uniform, etc.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.